purring. I could listen to this all day. So sweet. Literally, could put a cup of tea on that, it wouldn't slide off. Well, actually with this engine it would, because it's canted back ways. Got a Z-Tech and it's a bit more flatter surface. Might get away with a cup of tea not sliding off. And back down to idle. Little bit more shaky than the later versions, the TIVCT as it's known, but mainly that's due to an improvement in the engine mountings. If you've ever driven a Mark II Focus or Mark III Focus with this engine, you'll know what I mean. You can barely feel this in the cabin. In a Mark I, you can feel a little bit of vibration, that's completely normal. But today's subject is how the car actually idles, particularly both engines, whether it's the Z-Tech or this engine, specifically this engine because this is the one in front of me. But today's subject is idle control valves. They're so easy to take off. Two 8mm bolts, an electrical connection, bit of cleaning, and that's what you need to do. But I'll show you a bit more in detail, and because we can take this off, I'll show you something else as well which is quite important on this engine and something vastly overlooked. Okay, right, idle control valves. What do they do when they play up? Well, when they play up, you may know about it. The idle will be hunting. It may almost stall but not quite cut out. Those are some symptoms that the actual stepper motor inside the idle control valve is starting to get a bit sticky. Now, very rarely have I heard of a failure of the solenoid itself. Usually it is more of a solenoid stepper motor as such. It's a motor that moves in micro steps to block out or restrict the actual pathway through the idle circuit. So when the throttle is shut, there is a little bit of air that is allowed round past the valve into the inlet manifold to be burnt to the engine, just to keep the engine ticking over at approximately 850 RPM, and that is usually the factory setting on these engines. It can't really be tampered with. I wouldn't recommend messing with anything. There is like a screw adjustment down there. You do not mess with that whatsoever. It is set in the factory. You leave it alone because this is calibrated specifically for the factory settings. So there is no adjustment required, but it is a case of looking after what you've got. Now, particularly the stepper motor. The stepper motor will work with what the ECU tells it to do, okay? Now, the normal routine characteristic, and I will show you this now because this is a good demonstration. When you start the car, now this car is relatively, it's not warm, I can tell you now. But the characteristic when this car is warm should be this when starting up. There you go, about 1800 RPM, and then it comes down to 1100, and then it goes to idle. So about 1800, drops to 1100, couple of seconds, and then idle. If you want to watch that again. Oh, not quite this time, it was actually lower than that. But it should raise itself between 1500 and 1900, around about that, and then drop to around 1100, 1000 RPM, and then back to idle. Okay, that is the natural characteristic of a genuine idle control valve, and what I've got a problem with, hence why I've got all these down here. These are all genuine idle. I know this one worked because I cleaned this up a bit more. These are all genuine stepper motors, okay? Genuine Ford. They've all come off used Ford Focus Mark 1s that are no longer with us, sadly. But these do live on. And we have the little stepper motor, which just moves out a tad. We've got some air coming in. Air will go through this second chute and go straight into the engine. So that's how it moves. It just moves out a little bit there. Nothing really technical. I think there is a parts number somewhere. No, there isn't on this. I can't remember where the parts number was. I think, there we go. The parts number is here. So 1S4U 9F715BC. Now that will be slightly different, I suspect, for the Z-Tex. They may have a slightly different stepper motor. They might have the exact same one. I didn't really actually look into it too much. But these are relatively clean. They look a bit gummy in places, but they don't actually look that bad. And that's what happens when you put a bit of carb cleaner through. Just get some carb cleaner. But that is really it. Now the aftermarket ones, the reason why I tell you go and get a second-hand one if you think that you've got a solenoid failure, it will throw a code if that happens, but usually they're just gummed up. You just don't need to buy another one. It's most of them have been replaced unnecessarily, and I've seen a few Mark ones with aftermarket ones, because I can tell because they're so shiny, and those aftermarket ones do not behave like that. I bought an aftermarket one. Now this is the reason I can tell you this. Many years ago, when I didn't care as much about this car, I had problems with the idle. Turns out it was a slight air leak from the inlet manifold. That's another area of concern that is starting to fail more. But this failed prematurely, and I didn't diagnose it. The garage did, and they changed it for me back then. And this was 8 years ago. But I changed the idle valve because it was so easy to change. So I've bought an aftermarket one. And I tell you what, that one behaved dreadfully. You'd start the car up and it would rev to 2,500 RPM for 4 or 5 seconds uncontrollably. Dreadful on a cold start. And then eventually it would get to go down to about 1,100 RPM. It was dreadful. It was uncontrolled. That's not how they're supposed to behave. These behave exactly like that. So anyway, if you want to get it off and have it clean, literally just 2 bolts. 2 8mm bolts. It's a bit stiff. So these bolts out. A couple of these bolts lying around because I've taken so many out of Mark 1s for braking. They are very easy to take out. There we go. Just they're inserted into this metal thread in the plastic intake manifold, and you just have the electrical connector, of which I could probably just push it in. There we go. Might be a bit stiff on yours, but mine's come off a few times. I did give this a clean up. This was a good second-hand one. Because I threw the original one in the bin, didn't I, when I bought the aftermarket one? So when I wanted to start properly renovating this car a few years ago, of which it's starting to look a little bit funny in the corners again. This is an old, I class this as an older restoration. There are many people in the Mark 1 preservation group and the community that are starting to restore these, and I am so pleased that people are inspired by some of my videos and maybe what others are doing, and are starting to rebuild theirs and respray theirs and sandblast. Oh my goodness me, the sky's the limit. And this is starting to look a little bit careworn in places, but I don't care. It's actually quite an original restoration, meaning I didn't really go over the top about it. I prefer to keep it relatively original. I mean, you know, you can allow for things like this. It's annoying. It will get done eventually, but I don't want it to look absolutely pristine. I want it to look good, but I don't want it to look too good. And you might laugh when you say this isn't pristine. It isn't to me, because I'm the owner. And when you're the owner, you tend to look at things in a bit more detail. Yeah, that's good. Perfect. Now this has been cleaned to an inch of its life, and there's just no sign whatsoever that I need to use carb cleaner with that. So I'm going to leave it as it is. There will be a little bit of dirt in there, but it's usually carbon that backs up in the inlet manifold. If you ever take the inlet manifold off, guys, change the gasket as per matter of course, and try and clean all of it out. Clean the throttle body. It makes such a difference. If you are having funny idle, don't blame this. Maybe it's an air leak. Maybe your throttle housing and your inlet manifold need cleaning. Use contact cleaner. Don't worry about the sticker saying don't use abrasive cleaners inside the housing because it could wipe off the coating. I did that and it's not been a problem, so don't worry about that. Just clean it off very gently with some electrical contact cleaner. Please do not use carb cleaner inside here, because we're talking about plastic here. Please do not. Don't use it in the throttle housing, the housing, or the inlet manifold. It's as simple as that, and you'll find your car runs a lot smoother. Because if you imagine, if you've got a film of carbon and coke that sit, these engines are very clean, by the way. They're not like CVHs that I'm dealing with at the moment. These are very clean engines, but over 20 years you will have a film of carbon that will stick to the inside of these octopus legs, I call them, and you will probably need to try and get a screwdriver and then a rag and just keep going backwards and forwards, take it off the car and have a good afternoon scrubbing this inlet manifold up. Because people, honestly, some people are out there spending a fortune on what they call sports coil packs and HT leads and then remaps to try and get a few more horsepower out of a 1.6, which I think is inappropriate. Whereas I can tell you now, you can restore power to your 1.6 by taking this thing off and cleaning it inside out and doing a reset. You'll have to have the battery off for so long, okay? As long as you've got the battery off and disconnected for half an hour, it'll reset itself and it will learn some new parameters based on good airflow. Because if you imagine carbon is stuck to the inside of this, the air cannot flow freely into the cylinders from the actual inlet manifold itself. You can't do that. It just won't run as freely. Whereas if you get rid of that carbon, you're making the surface nice and smooth, so therefore you won't have as many problems. But anyway, there's no problems with this. Bit of a contact cleaner may be there, but there really isn't a problem with that. Now, the second issue that I would recommend you replace is this gasket. So this is where the air comes in, that's where the air goes out past the stepper motor, which allows a certain amount of air through into the engine. We've got this gasket here. Now, I replaced this gasket ages ago. It's quite a small gasket, but if you look for inlet, it's called the idle air control gasket, IAC gasket. I'll see if I can get a parts number for it. I have to do some digging because I can't remember where I bought. I definitely bought it off eBay, but I can't remember. But I basically, when I changed the gasket again a couple of years ago. The garage changed the inlet manifold gasket several years ago. I changed it again when I took it off again and cleaned it all out. But I changed this at the same time, and I changed the gasket here. There are 4 areas of major air leaks on a Mark 1. Inlet manifold gasket. This gasket can leak, I can tell you that. That will cause such a problem with this thing, it's untrue, so that might be your issue. The gasket here, where you've got to take all these screws out, and believe me, that's easy. That's a pain. That one down there's even more pain, and this is a pain. You're going to need some good Torx bits and adapters to try and get all these Torx bolts off. Believe you me. But there's a gasket there. It can leak from there because basically what we have here with the MAF sensor, it will tell the car, oh, there's 10 lots of air coming into the car, but there's a couple of leaky gaskets letting air in. So there's not 10 lots of air, there's 13 lots of air. And the computer's like, what? Hold on, you're telling me that there's 10 coming in, but I've got all this air coming in. What's going on? And then it plays up and it goes into limp home. It goes into a lean running mode and it will start playing up because there's too much air and not enough fuel that the ECU is compensating for. So the sensors can tell it one thing, but then something else happens and it's like, oh, hold on, you didn't tell me this, MAF sensor, you lying to me. And then it goes into this, unfortunately, limp home mode. The second subject of today, and the fourth source of air leaks, is this breather pipe underneath here. Okay, this breather pipe runs all the way underneath these octopus legs. Okay, I'm trying to aim you in so you can see better, but unfortunately my camera won't focus in too much. But you see down there where my finger is, there is a valve. It's a PCV valve. Okay, it is an oil separator. It allows fuel vapors to come from the crankcase through to the breather pipes and in through the inlet system, okay, to be burnt in the engine. But what that does, it stops oil actually physically getting into those breather pipes. Now, the problem is with oil separators is they're not entirely efficient. They will allow some oil residue through those breather pipes. And the reason this breather pipe will frequently fail is because over a period of 10-15 years there's oil inside that rubber, and oil and hoses don't go well. Anybody with a Rover K series who's had a head gasket failure can tell you they've had to replace most of their hoses because the oil will be in the hoses, and oil attacks rubber, and oil is attacking that breather hose right this very second probably, but it's a very minute amount because this is a low mileage car. It will probably last 20 years, this hose, but over time that hose is constantly under air pressure, and then it's got the oil attacking it, and eventually it just gives out, and one big massive hole, and you'll know about it. It will be dreadful. It's the #1 case of air leaks, I'm afraid. But that breather hose, if you've got a small child, you can get your hands, because you've got the idle control valve being removed, you could probably get the pipe off. Just pull it up. I'm just gonna, there we go, off. Oh, not quite. Just, oh, it's come off with the pipe. Right, the actual valve has come out right of its slot. Okay, you see down there, this is the valve. I don't know if you can see down there, there's a little rubber bung that this sits in. So now I'm just going to pull this off now. Try to release it then. I've just twisted it straight off. And there we go, it comes out. Now, this is your PCV valve. Quite an important item. And you see oh yes, nice, perfect. Now, some of you may have guessed this is not a genuine one. No, because like a few things, like the idle control valve, the original one gummed up. I threw it in the bin because I didn't know any better in them days. I had absolutely no mechanical skill whatsoever. And I'm thinking, why did I bin it? I could have just cleaned it. Because I just think it was a throwaway item. You could just get these replaced easy. Now, this is an aftermarket one. It's a plastic one, but no issues with it. I don't intend to replace it with a metal one whatsoever. They're very high quality. There's a ball inside there, and there's a little flap there. And all you got to do is this one check. Does it shake? Yes, that ball shakes, which means it's not gummed up. The reason these valves play up, they basically get gummed up with oily, gunky residue, which is why it's so important to change the oil, guys. If the oil is gummed up, this will get gummed up. If this gets gummed up, the ball stops shaking, and therefore you're going to have severe crankcase pressure. The oil cannot vent out the crankcase, and therefore you're going to have oil leaks. This is the thing. The first thing people say is, I've got an oil leak. Oh, I need to change my gaskets, or I need to scrap the car because it looks like my crank seal's leaking and my crankshaft seal is leaking. Hold on. Right, before you start saying all that, and the sump gasket's leaking as well. There's no sump gasket. It's just silicone or Hylamar. I use Hylamar for the sumps on these. If it's leaking from several different places, do not dismiss the breathing system. Usually people think it's the gasket that's failed. I would argue if it's one gasket that's leaking, then it might be that, or a seal, okay? The rear crank seals don't leak on these engines. I've never known one to leak. I've known some of these to weep on the crankshaft sprocket side by the oil pump, but very, very rarely. If you're getting multiple oil leaks across the engine, so rocker cover gasket, and then the sump is leaking from an area, and a suspected rear crank seal where it's leaking around the bell housing, if you're getting multiple oil failures, I would suggest check this, because this could be stuck. And if this is stuck, I reckon that's your problem. All you need to do, if it's so gunked you can't clean it out, just spray a bit of carb cleaner into it and it's all sorted. If it's still a bit gummy and the ball isn't, it needs to be this. It needs to be that loose. If it isn't that loose, get a new one. Get an aftermarket one, a plastic one. This cost me £7. You can get a genuine one, which is a metal one. That's fine as well. You don't have to. I think I've proven that aftermarket ones are absolutely fine in this case. I'm all for genuine parts, guys, but I'm all for saving a bit of money as well, where genuine Ford parts are not necessary. So this is your culprit, and if I just show you the hose, can you see a bit of moisture there? Look at that. That's oil, that is. See what I mean? That is a film of oil that's inside the breather pipes. This is why these are not quite efficient. They let so much oil vapor through. This side should be covered in oil, which it is. This side should be relatively clean, but it isn't. There's still a bit of oil around there. So these aren't entirely efficient. And this isn't because it's an aftermarket one. The genuine ones are not efficient. If the genuine ones were absolutely, let's say, more efficient than the aftermarket ones and let less oil through, why do the breather pipes still fail? Because the originals have the same problem. They're just inherently flawed, but they do a good job, and they make sure that your engine crankcase pressure is reduced and all those vapors are returned and burned to the engine very efficiently. So there you go, guys. Just stick a bit of carb cleaner through this and we're done. I'm just going to put it in the back side. I bought all these tools with me because I thought that the valve might be a bit difficult to get out. I mean, to be fair, that wouldn't have fitted around it at all. But my usual technique is to try and get a screwdriver and just to pry it up with a screwdriver just on this ledge here. If you're struggling to get it out, it might be tight, but it shouldn't be tight. That rubber bung isn't really not that massively tight. It doesn't need to be tight because, you know, no air is going to cause a leak and disrupt everything there. But there you go. That's even looser than what it was before. There you go. Fantastic. In fact, that is actually looser than what it was before. Just a remarkable difference that just a bit of carb cleaner makes, and that was relatively good. Brilliant. Back in. Just try and twist that back in. Fuffy bit this is. There we go. Make sure it's fully on and nicely seated. Now we should just push that back into place and pop it into the hole. Come on. There we go. Done. Done. Fantastic. Right. Idle control valve can go back in as well. There we go. Pop that back in. And 2 screws. And there you go. Easy peasy. So a couple of pointers. The gasket on this, do not ignore the gasket on this idle control valve, and just check your PCV valve. There's no need to replace. You really don't need to do that. Done. And that is as simple as that. 2 things that you don't need to replace. You just clean them. You clean the idle control motor and you clean that valve and check that breather hose if you haven't replaced it. If you have replaced it, good. But anyway, I'm going to end this episode here. 2 important jobs, very easy ones, can take you less than 10 minutes. Take care, guys. Enjoy your Mark 1s.